Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Burns, and I'm a public health program manager in the Tower Hamlets Council Public Health team. And I'm one of the co-chairs of this community of practice focused on trauma-informed approaches alongside Patricia Potter, who's also here. Today, we're going to have a bit of a kind of thinking about the future of the group session, but we'll do a bit of looking back first, both locally, and then also we've got a guest speaker here who will talk about London more broadly in terms of what's going on with trauma-informed approaches across the city. So thanks for joining. I just have a couple of looking back slides, and then I'll pass over to Megan, who's here to present. So just bear with me while I get that up on screen. Okay. So firstly, I just wanted to really quickly highlight some upcoming or existing training opportunities that people might be interested in. The first one is focused on people that work with families, primarily those that are that have very young children or are expecting a new baby. This is funded through the Family Hubs and Start for Life program, and it covers things like perinatal mental health, attachment, and kind of early emotional development, as well as trauma-informed approaches. And there will be lots of, I guess, modules offered in the next couple of months, both online and in person, and some train the trainer sessions. So hopefully that's exciting for people. I haven't included the links on the slide, but I will make sure that that is included once when I'm circulating this out. And then the other one, just to highlight, which I think we've spoken about before as a group or mentioned previously, is the free kind of online self-paced offer that's available through Thrive London, and it's on YouTube, but you can get certificates if you complete the training and the kind of post training evaluation. And so those are, I just wanted to highlight those two in case you want something a bit more flexible. Or if you want to share those with your teams as well, if you've already completed previous training. Thinking back, I know a lot of people have been to previous sessions of the group this year, but if you haven't, this is just like a bit of a look back on some of the topics that we've covered as a group through these monthly sessions. So lots of different areas of work around that relate to trauma-informed approaches. So we had a few different sessions focusing on the topic of racism and trust, particularly among Black communities in London and in East London. We had a session focused on the work that's going on with different homeless populations in Tower Hamlets. I sent across the new report that was published by Toynbee Hall about the participatory action research project that they conducted with young people. And we heard from Russia a few months ago on that project, which was really great. And just a few other ones as well. So range of topics. And we also had a few different reflective discussions as a group where it wasn't necessarily topic based, but just thinking about how we're doing and coping with trying to work in a trauma-informed way. I think we'll revisit this later, but I think when we're thinking about what we want to do next, it's helpful to think about context. But I will stop sharing for now because I want to make sure that Megan has enough time to present her work or her team's work. So Megan, over to you. You might do a better justice to your team and the organization.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Angela. Thank you. But I was loving the Kamala Harris coconut tree context reference as well. It's quite funny. All right, yeah. So my name is Megan. I am a part of Dartington Service Design Lab, which is a children's charity working across the UK that's focused on improving outcomes for young people with a kind of specific focus on systems change. And right now we're partnered with the London Violence Reduction Unit to think around trauma-informed practice across London. And so our kind of key priority groups that we've been engaging for this work is healthcare, thinking around healthcare practitioners alongside ICB and public health, local authorities, the Met, and then kind of voluntary sector organizations that are connected with those groups. And the idea is to both build a shared definition of what we mean by trauma-informed practice and think around kind of examples of best practice and where it is that kind of additional efforts would help to make the most impact across London. So this work has been happening since around April of last year. But the phases that we've done to date include a survey that was across London, focusing in on trying to get an understanding of what a baseline of trauma-informed practice looks like across those key groups, and then a series of workshops that we call promising practice workshops. That engaged about a little over 60 practitioners and help kind of leaders across health, across frontline practice work, whether that be in community organizations, health, or local authorities, police leaders, and local authority leaders as well. And today I'm just going to talk through some of those insights, share a bit of the findings that's come through the work, alongside some of the kind of next steps and potential points for engagement as well, if it's something that you're interested in. I'm trying to not take up too much time. So I've got a decent amount of stuff on the slides. I might just skip some of the slides, but then I'll send it to you. If it's interesting to you, you can read it in a little bit more detail. And also, one of the promising practice sessions is how I got connected with Angela and this work. And just to let you know, Angela, I updated the slides slightly since what I sent you yesterday, so I'll share those with you as well. Perfect. Can people see that all right? Let me see.
Yes.
And then, oh, sorry. I always struggle with sharing my screen and trying to see people at the same time. 1 second. There we go. Perfect. All right, so I gave a bit of an introduction to who we are. So I'm just going to skip forward a bit. So like I said, today I'm just going to go through an overview of some of the key insights of the work to date, and think around the different domains and the different core areas that we're looking across London, key sectors that we're looking across London, and then something that we're calling the mechanisms of change for trauma-informed practice across London. So details on the survey. The survey, like I said, was to get an understanding of trauma-informed practice across London and gather a baseline, with the priority of getting an understanding around the Met, local authorities, and health. The survey was from around November through January this year, and we had 150 respondents, so there's varying degrees of kind of input from different sectors. The highest sector that we got responses from were the Met. We have 30 responses from local authorities, 26 from health, 10 from voluntary service organizations, and 10 others. So there's some insights that we can build and refer from, but there's a lot of other engagements that we did on top of the survey to get a more clear understanding of what trauma-informed practice looks like across London. But just to give you an understanding of where people were taking the survey, people identified as being pan-London for 28, 40 from North London. There's a group of police that were especially from North London, but put up those numbers: 28 from East London, 23 from South, 13 from West, and 10 Central. And then we had about 40 people, 40%, 39% identifying as frontline practitioners, 24 as strategic leaders, and then we had about 22 for delivery, 10 for operation support, and 8% other. So that's an understanding of who took the survey. Overall, the survey in itself went through understanding trauma-informed practice through focusing on kind of 4 or 6 different core areas, and this aligns a bit with the SAMHSA definition, or the SAMHSA definition of trauma-informed practice, alongside kind of some particular areas that we really wanted to focus in on. So that was looking at organizational culture, policy and resourcing, training and workforce development, governance and leadership, monitoring and planning, and direct practice. We also had a couple of questions within those categories that were specifically focused in on power sharing and thinking around equitable, anti-racist, trauma-informed practice as well. So to get an understanding of kind of what this looked like overall, organizational culture was the thing that was actually responded to most positive overall. So that includes things around like trust amongst colleagues, feeling supported, the amount of workforce, the force that you had in your like kind of sense of psychological and physical safety. However, it did have a decent amount of variance across different sectors and teams. Um, Training and workforce development was an area that also had high ratings, so people were happy with that overall. Um, and again, that varied to a degree. Governance and leadership was the least positively responded to on average. So that meant that, especially when it comes to leadership, this was something that people had had less confidence in when it comes to implementing trauma-informed practice. And then other areas like policy resourcing, direct practice, and monitoring and planning were rated kind of in between in that area. Um, but to give you a more detailed understanding of what that looks like, um, I've developed a couple core insights across sectors. So this is looking at in the survey, there's qualitative responses and quantitative kind of scaling, Likert scale, getting understanding of how much you agree with something. And then a little bit of this too is some of those engagements that we had in the promising practice sessions as well. So just to give you an understanding of what's come out of the work so far, one of the core insights was around the essential need for a whole system commitment to trauma-informed practice. So while trauma-informed practice has been increasingly recognized across sectors, implementation remains inconsistent. So that means that in some areas might feel really strong in their practice, but other areas it's quite far from what they're doing. Equally, that could be like types around thinking around trauma-informed supervision or thinking around trauma-informed training. It's not kind of equitably spread throughout different sectors and workforces across London. And that there's kind of overall across all of the key sectors, there's people highlighted strong foundations in direct practice, especially where it comes to kind of building off of those interactions and implementing trauma-informed practice within those spaces. And there's confidence in relationship building and kind of resilience as a part of the work. However, we know that that's operating within a context that is quite challenging as well. So those things include resource constraints and rigid structures that hinder trauma-informed adoption and sustainability. So that's thinking around the kind of the types of funding that are available for trauma-informed practice, but also thinking around kind of organizational structures that prohibit, for instance, taking time off after kind of after secondhand trauma from something happening in work, or kind of having the space to talk to a line manager, having clinical support in those things. Those can also kind of hinder the adoption of trauma-informed practice. The variation in training access, psychological safety, and reflective practices that impact staff support as well. I think psychological safety, especially in policing, was rated quite low overall, and that having that be a big impact on their ability to kind of engage in trauma-informed practice. And that leadership engagement varies. And so there's concerns with different power dynamics and inconsistent buy-in, and having leadership more removed from what trauma-informed practice might look like for practitioners themselves, but then also the importance of having leaders being bought into this in order for that to be implemented across organizations and people to feel like they have the kind of backing and support that they need. And then kind of opportunities around cultural and organizational change. We saw that trauma-informed practice must move beyond training to address power sharing and systemic change, thinking around systems themselves that might reproduce trauma and how to address those more directly. Thinking around staff well-being as a really key important factor in trauma-informed practice and the need for that to be prioritized. And again, seeing around leadership must visibly champion trauma-informed practice to foster that alignment and embedded practice across teams. One other thing that we had here too was the importance of kind of organizational alignment and commitment collaboration, and some of the barriers from that being having different different language around what we mean by trauma-informed practice, different views around that. Some people seeing trauma-informed practice as really a buzzword, and some people seeing it as something that's not going far enough. So kind of sitting across the sector in different ways. but how critical it is to think around what that shared vision, shared language is in order to enable collaboration. And where collaboration can be done, it was seen as overall something that was quite successful if it was kind of adequately resourced and supported. So what I have here is insights from each of those core audiences. I'm not going to go into the detail of all of them because the overarching insights covers them, but just to point you to them in case you want to look at them at another time. These are the core insights from local authorities. This is core insights from the Met. This is core insights from healthcare leaders. And this is core insights from practitioners. I'm sorry for going through those really quickly, but just so you know where they are, there's a bit more detail there. Then the next part of the work is just thinking around mechanisms of change for trauma-informed practice. So this was us building in all of the insights from the work to date and thinking around, okay, where are some of the core kind of leverage points or areas that consistent kind of investment and collaboration work could make a lot of change across London. And to mention as well, it's not just myself, and I probably should have mentioned this before as well, but it's not just myself and the VRE team working on this. We have a group of champions that kind of sit across healthcare, the Met, voluntary service organizations, and local authorities that are consistently a part of this work. So we just presented this to that team of people. We meet every month together, kind of similar maybe to this group. And this is some of the insights that have come out of that work as well. But just to give you a bit of a background, when we say mechanism change, we're thinking around how and why an activity leads to a positive outcome within a specific context. So these are kind of like the core ingredients that help to make change happen. So it's thinking around not just what you do, but how people experience a service or a relationship or support and how they engage with it that creates the impact. So mechanisms of change could include how, like I said, how someone interacts with an activity or an intervention, the kind of relationships and trust that are built, and thinking around emotions, thoughts and behaviors that might take place. So we're trying to narrow down into those kind of core mechanisms to think around what do they look like across all of these sectors in London. And just a little background, like I said, to how we built these out was through insights from the survey, a literature review, promising practice workshops with 62 practitioners, and then a synthesis of these insights alongside engaging the our trauma-informed champions group as well. And what we're really interested right now is thinking around what examples can we elevate across London that show how these kind of mechanisms exist in practice, so that we can build that into kind of an overarching roadmap that I'll talk to in a second as well. But just to give you, again, I'm just going to talk through these really quickly, but then there's more detail in the slides that I'll share over. But these are kind of the 5 core mechanisms of change that we've identified through the work so far. So one is around building that shared understanding of trauma-informed practice. So not only like a shared definition, but kind of principles and an understanding of what that looks like in practice across a variety of settings and spaces. Thinking around support for staff, and especially support for staff with lived experience and secondary like experience of trauma as well within the workplace as well. And I think this is something that came out of some of the conversations that we were having in these practitioner focused trauma informed practice kind of promising practice sessions, where there's really it's thinking around if we want to have more people with lived experience in roles working to promote trauma-informed practice, how are we actually creating the supports that are needed for them to do that work and for them to equitably be included in teams. Supporting trusted relationships is another key kind of driver of trauma-informed practice across London. Leadership buy-in, as I said, and then a systemic focus. So that's thinking around disrupting systems that might reproduce trauma, and specifically thinking around kind of an anti-racist perspective, but then also systems that might kind of favor, you know, efficiency and kind of really quick moments of connection over having a kind of a trauma-informed space, and the tension that it means to exist within services operating there. So um, I'm just going to go through these really quickly again, but there's a lot of detail on what these mean. We have barriers, enablers, and outcomes related to these things. So I'll share that with all of you, just an understanding. That's what the shared understanding of what trauma-informed practice means. And then kind of going out, you see the barriers first, then the enablers and the outcomes. But I'm just going to go through these really quick again. And I'll send this to you by email, but happy to go back to a slide if anyone has questions. And then finally is just an understanding of where we're going from here. So we are doing a series of case study workshop focus group kind of sessions taking place in April, where we really want to elevate some of these kind of core drivers of trauma-informed practice across London and provide examples to what good practice looks like. And it doesn't need to be perfect practice, because we know that there's a lot of challenges, and we want to highlight those challenges, but it's thinking around how are organizations overcoming some of these challenges, what are they doing that is working well, that we can elevate and build into a platform that will be held by the VRU, and hopefully we'll be able to leverage a lot of like core stakeholders across London. And those core case studies will feed into right now what we're calling a trauma-informed roadmap, but it could look like a lot of different things. So we're building out kind of this core resource base that can be used for people to engage with in a lot of different ways, but also for influencing, thinking around who it is that we need to get engaged in this space in order to make the most change in London. And that will be kind of shared out at some point this summer, hopefully in July, with a big celebration event that will include a lot of people across London. And I'm happy to keep you all posted in those events to come as well. And yes, like I said, we have a community steering group that meets monthly and has been involved in directing this work as well. So tried to go through that really quickly. That's everything that we have. Sorry for it being a little bit rushed, but thank you so much for inviting me today to share a little bit about that work. And I'll share those slides, but happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you so much. I realize there's quite a lot of detail coming under that, so I'm excited to read through the slides after. Does anyone have any quick questions? We still have more than half an hour left in the session, so there is a bit of time to ask or dive into something. Alistair, go ahead.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I really enjoyed what you presented. One thing I wonder about is the viability of the aspiration for a shared definition. And I think just as an assumption of a process, and I would probably think in terms of the aspiration to have a shared understanding of the map, if you like, rather than a reductive process that says we now share a definition of something that's an objective thing. Trauma is multiple perspectives, and I don't think you can have one idea of trauma any more than you can have one religion or one philosophy. So I think if you go really deeply, then you see it's just impossible. It's not a viable project to have a shared understanding of trauma. But I think the task is to have a much richer understanding of what is informing each person's understanding of all the different aspects that could be described as traumatic, which again is hugely variable and depending on context. And so there are so many. So I admire I understand the need if in a kind of a service world to try and have something that's sharp and shared, but I don't actually think it's achievable, and there are losses when you try and achieve that. And I think it's just a challenge how we live with the glorious mess and chaos and confusion and wonders of human experience. But yeah, that's the one thing that I think that I might change the language around thinking. I wonder what you thought.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that's an important thing to point to. And yes, that risk there of if we're creating a shared language, like who's that shared language for and what does that reduce from the complexity of what good kind of context-focused trauma-informed practice is about. And so I appreciate that kind of feedback, and I think that's something for us to think around. I think there's one element of kind of in a really basic level having a couple of things that help to kind of connect sectors, at least to enable potential cross-sector working or collaboration. So there's some areas and points of connection to think around, what does this look like? And that could be very different across sectors, because I think there's some individuals and organizations that feel that they're kind of really immersed in trauma-informed practice, or they're thinking around it in a really complex way. And there's some organizations and services that feel that trauma-informed practice is a buzzword, and why would they even want to engage with it in the first place? So even managing those kind of different kind of polar ends, I think there's something around just enabling a bit of bringing in, especially those people that are on the end that just think trauma-informed practice is a buzzword and they wouldn't want to engage into understanding how they're a part of this. But yeah, it's nuanced and very complex, so definitely appreciate that. Yeah, Sherelle. Oh, I can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. There are other buttons on here as well. Sorry. Yeah, no, just wanted to echo what's already been said. Just thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm really looking forward to going through those slides, and those infographics looked really cool. I was just kind of curious about this idea of psychological safety. It's a word that I'd seen written up quite a lot within, and I guess I was just kind of reflecting on yeah, what this means for people. And sometimes I think some of these words are kind of used interchangeably. There can be this kind of feeling that if something is uncomfortable, then it's unsafe. And I was just kind of curious, like maybe it's a wider conversation to have, but kind of curious as to what that kind of balancing act is, because when we're thinking about rejigging and restructuring power, and it will mean people giving up some and people holding on to some and rebalancing their own sense of self and responsibility in their work and in whatever system they are working in a trauma-informed way. I wonder if actually we're observing psychological unsafety or something that's uncomfortable. And it's not to dismiss people's feelings, but I was just curious as to the boundaries of that term being used and what you're thinking and feeling and how other people maybe in the space feel when this term is used.
Really interesting reflection. Yeah, I guess we had it as a specific question in the survey itself. So thinking around within organizational culture, around kind of a lot of the questions within that space was around what's your level of trust with work with your colleagues, kind of feeling around workload capacity. And then there was questions around physical safety and psychological safety. So I guess to a degree, I think maybe the intent behind the question was thinking around experiences of trauma or secondhand trauma within in work settings, or kind of within organizational cultures. But I think like there is that other side, like that you just pointed out, that could be around feeling uncomfortable, or kind of being forced to step out of what is your comfort zone in order to do something that might be more trauma informed, or thinking around, different changing organizational culture practices and stuff like that, which could be a part of this as well. So I think that might be something that we want to unpack. And I think that is really around the question of like, who is this for? And how do we ensure that, trauma informed practice isn't something that is just going to be like a one size fits all generalized approach that then takes away from like communities that have long standing historical kind of structural re-traumatization, or within kind of those relationships as well. So I think that's a nuanced thing that we need to be paying really close attention to. So thank you for bringing that up as well. Yeah, Patricia, sorry, also Angela, if there's, you can keep an eye on time as well.
And I'll apologize for kind of disrupting time. Thank you so much. It's really inspiring work that you've done, and really complex and challenging. As someone who's trying to sort of get to grips within just one organisation, the complexity and the variance and the kind of use of language to the same words meaning different things. Hats off to you for working across London. I think the issue of language is important, and I think I would have a slightly different position to Alistair in that while we don't want to pin it down into something simplistic, I think we've got to find a good enough shared understanding of what we mean when we use these approaches. And I don't think it is just about, well, that's important for services, because the people of London use and come into contact with all of these different services, and it would be nice if they didn't notice a difference. If you were kind of in contact with the police or with health services, that there was some shared common understanding. So I think it's really difficult, but really important. And I think we can have both. We can have the general and the specific. I was thinking about, we all know what we mean when we talk about fruit, but I might kind of have a particular focus on apples, and someone else might have a real focus on mangoes. And then there might be some disagreement about whether a tomato is a fruit or is it a vegetable. So I think we can do that. We've got that ability, but we do have to try. I think it's really important. And then a very kind of concrete thing. Are you linking in with the Psychological Professions Network community of trauma-informed community of practice? And if not, I can link you up, because I think that's probably quite an important piece that primarily cuts through health, but I think kind of has a wider brief than that, and is working, supported by the Cavendish Square group. So I think there's an important connection there. But thank you, and I really look forward to reading and hearing more about it.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. We have not been connected with them yet, so that would be really great. Maybe I'll send you a follow-up email or something, and we can get connected. That would be fantastic. Yeah,
Great.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry. We've
Go
got
on.
time for one more. Go ahead, Jordan.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. I think it's really helpful hearing colleagues sort of raise the issue around language. And I think Patricia, a really, really interesting and well put example around sort of semantics as well in language. I think it's really poignant, and it was a really good way of illustrating sort of the challenges that we have around language. One of the things that I'm always mindful, like my role spans across like lots of different mental health, emotional wellbeing strands, and also in reaches to the learning disabilities and autism space, is that language comes up as an ongoing theme across all of those spaces, and we're all talking about language, and every single one of these areas has an idea around having a shared language, and it's just like, whose do we go with? And I think, Patricia, like you say, like fruit is such a great example, but it's like we have to, like, how do we from a more strategic, systematic perspective just have one truth and one line of like where we're going to go with? And I think it can be quite difficult having lots of groups saying we need a shared language without everyone coming together and having an established sort of what that language is going to be. But then again, like even just saying that, I know like how unrealistic it is to get all of those people together to agree that. So I think it's a really interesting and helpful thing to have the conversation about, but I'm just, without like just saying that this is a problem and no resolve, it's just like, how do we realistically approach that in a measured way across, I suppose, across like the health, education, social care, voluntary care sector landscape? It's a beast, isn't it? So it's like, how do we realistically approach it?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that right there is the challenge, isn't it? And yeah, I think what we're doing right now probably is just going to be, one step, hopefully, in kind of creating that shared vision. It's going to be complex and varied and might change over time, and it needs to include engaging a lot of people to get that. But yeah, doing what we can with what we have.
I think sometimes, and if it's okay, just quickly come back on it, that there's something around I suppose being aware of what we can control for the wider system, isn't it? And I think if we all, like, imagine if there's your piece of work and lots of other pieces of work that are trying to create a shared language, you've actually got the risk of going off in different directions. And like, I know this is overly negative and not very solution focused, so apologies for that from the offset, but I suppose identifying the challenge and the problem is one of the key things in addressing it, because we do run the risk of sort of moving away from a shared language if everyone's moving towards a space of shared language in their own direction. And I don't know how we sort of loop that together. I'm even thinking of like Thrive. That's one of the fundamental parts of Thrive, right? And we had a transitions workshop yesterday, and language came up there, and it's a like a hot topic across lots of spaces, so there should be engagement in it, but it's just like who is the person and who is the group to have the one shared focus, and that might change from place to place as well. Thanks, Angela. Sorry for my Thrive.
I'm going to jump in with kind of chair's privilege. I think we need to hold in mind that language is constantly changing. You know, it's an ever moving piece, and as soon as we think we've got something nailed down, it will shift, and that is driven by all sorts of factors, kind of sort of wider social context, prevailing zeitgeist, the kind of political drivers. And so all we can do, I think, really is have something that's good enough and keep checking back with each other that when I say this and you say that, are we talking about the same thing? So it's a kind of not wanting certainty, I think, is very understandable, but recognizing that language, the English language at least, is ever shifting, and things that meant one thing when I was in my 20s now mean something completely different. You know, it's not a kind of a glacial change. It can be, you know, this time next year, things will mean things, you know, will have quite different meanings. And it's about how we talk to each other and how we can trust each other. So I think some of the things that you identified, Megan, around what are the key mechanisms that are at stake, and trust is a really important one. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and observations. Shall we move into the next part of today? I'm just going to put my hand down if I'm not doing it by itself. All right, so we do this in chime with the financial year. I realise the kind of looking backwards and looking forwards in terms of this group. And so we wanted to spend some time today really thinking about what's important about this group, what you value, what you want it to be going forward, and I think sort of recognizing that it can only be the sum of all of its parts, i.e., all of us make the community. It's not something that lands from on high. So I'm going to hand over to Angela, who set up something fascinating and witty that I want to explain, that will allow us to kind of share our thoughts at the same time, and take a bit of time to reflect on what do we want, and also will allow us to capture those ideas that you have. So I'll hand over to Angela, and then you can tell me what to do next, actually.
Okay, sounds good. I'll start sharing my screen in just a sec to give a bit of a demo. But essentially, if you've used Jamboard before or something similar where you're putting virtual sticky notes on a piece of virtual paper, it's basically that. We've just found another free version, which is always exciting. And so we've got two questions. Patricia, tell me if we have maybe more space for just one, where it'd be great to kind of crowdsource how we want to prioritize this, like the work of this group going forward. And so I've popped the link to the discussion board in the chat, and then I'll just share my screen to show you how to contribute to it. It should be fairly straightforward feeling, but bear with me. So I can see some cursors now being added to it. What you want to do, you can see my mouse moving around on the right side of the screen. This little note icon, you can click on it and choose whatever color you like, and then put it somewhere and type in your idea. So for instance, if you think your team needs training that's specific to, I don't know, working with men, just an example, doesn't have to be what you want. Please could you add them? And we've got 2 questions for the room. The first one being like, obviously there's been some highlighted gaps that Megan mentioned, but there may be things that are specific to your context. And then the second question is more so about the priorities for the group. So maybe we can spend like 5 minutes on this one, and then we can spend a bit more time on the focus of the group in general. So stick you away.
Sticky away. And as you're doing that, I'll just make reference to the slide that Angela had up before Megan's presentation, which showed Kamala Harris and also the kind of the 3 realms of ACEs that people might be familiar with. And we were just, when Angela and I were talking about today, we were very mindful of how in our work, we probably primarily focus on the tree, things around the tree, the kind of things that are quite immediate to people in terms of where and how they live their lives, and also the roots, thinking about the community that people live in and what we can do to support, strengthen communities. But we are very mindful, and my goodness, this weekend shows us the sort of how the winds of change are quite turbulent at the moment in the wider world, and what that might mean for us individually and in our communities, for the people that we serve, the kind of potential uncertainty, or maybe not potential, but actual uncertainty that we're moving into. And therefore thinking about this, what this space might become or offer to us as individuals working in organisations that are already doing their best with not very much, and also in the face of how things may develop over the next months and years. So we just wanted to acknowledge that without sort of being too much of a doom-laden, sorry, that's the wrong word, talking about language, Alistair. But really kind of, trauma happens at multiple levels. We're affected by things that are very immediate to us, but things that are on the other side of the world can also have a very direct impact on our service users and ourselves, thinking about fuel and things like food. So I have been talking and sort of thinking that people will be populating the board. Is everybody able to make use of it? Is anybody struggling? See things that are coming up. So, and I think that training, again, this isn't necessarily, it's a learning space. I think that we can share learning and experiences. We're certainly not financed to deliver training, but I think it's also kind of how we use this space to perhaps amplify your voices in different spaces, and thinking about linking with Megan, your work, how we might feed into that. Leadership focus sessions. I'm not sure if that's thinking about how we lead and helping our leadership, or thinking about the people who lead us and whether they might want to join these sessions. I guess we'll tussle with this. Thinking about how the organisation can grow in a more trauma-informed way, of course that's organisations. We've got many organisations represented here. Highlighting good practice, and I think that's something that we like to think that's what we've been doing, in having lots of fantastic people coming to talk to us, and I think it's something that we can continue to do. Of course, that requires all of you to share your good practice. We'd love to hear about the work that you're doing. I think we can often be quite critical of what we're doing and see what's getting in the way and see maybe it's not as good as we'd like it to be. But my guess is if you're working in this way, you're probably doing some really good work that other people can learn from. I'm trying to catch up now. It's all everyone's kind of warmed up. We're getting lots of things. Arthur,
I think it's a great point, the person that put the sticky about commissioning and how do you monitor or like, I guess, guide how you evaluate that.
Yeah.
I know there's been a couple of sessions kind of thinking further back about evaluation that maybe we can bring back or share.
Yeah. Sustainable and flexible funding mechanisms. I think that's a big one, isn't it? And I think we that feels like a sort of thinking about how that relates to this group and what's within the gift of this group. Maybe we can kind of think what that would mean. Sessions that support those in leadership. Okay, shall we move on to the next question, which I think kind of focuses us a bit more in terms of what would you like to see in the upcoming months? We meet monthly. That's just a reminder. And every quarter we have an open session, which is not quite reflective practice, but it's a reflective space where we can it's open and it kind of people can bring what's particular for them at the moment, and just thinking about how we can support ourselves or support each other to keep going doing this work. So it is for all the things that we've talked about, quite complex, challenging, rewarding, and inevitably it sort of is something that we need to look after ourselves while we're trying to move this forward.
And for us to move on to the second page with question 2, which is displayed on the screen, if you just go to the left-hand side panel and click the second slide, it will take you to that second page. So please join us there.
Okay. And will this be kind of open and available for people to add to outside of this space? Angela?
Yep, so I can reshare the link when I send out the slides after the meeting. And I suppose let's keep it open for the next couple of weeks. And if you want to share it across with your teams as well, or like just people that you think might be interested, feel free, because it's always great to have a wider community contributing to it.
Yeah. And I think this question is, there might be something very specific that you want for the group to focus on, and it may be that we'd like there to be a neat answer, but there isn't, so we can have a discussion around how are you doing this, how are we doing that. So the kind of wicked problems, that might be a way of constructing this rather than something very, very specific. As I say, we have had and generally people are very positive about our usually Angela's requests to come and present here, and I think we'll continue to do that as serendipity sort of introduces us to work in this. We'll invite people into this space, but it would be good to get some steer. I'm not sure if the 2 little anonymous pointers means that people are working on things that are about to be posted. I guess the other question that we did talk about but decided not to put to you was whether you wanted this space to continue or not. We made an assumption that we would continue for as long as we can do. NVC training, and I am going to have to say I don't know what NVC is in this context. I'll probably feel very foolish when you tell me, but anybody NVC? Non-verbal communication? That's probably not that.
Great guess.
I was going to say, I'm so sorry if I've maybe missed something. This question here that you've put out there, I'm not able to see a link to it. Is that because you'd like us to do this at another point?
So this go on, Angela. You
Oh, sorry. I hope that, can you see on the screen, like you see where I'm screen sharing that there's a little,
tabs on the
maybe
left.
that's the issue. So yep, so we were on slide 1, and then on the left-hand side, you can move on to the second slide, which is where question 2 is.
Thank you.
So hopefully
I've just seen it now. It's come up.
That now. Thank you.
Thank you. And also just, I guess, to respond to that, like, I think these spaces are great. I like that there's a variety of us from different organizations and different professions, and admittedly I've not been able to come to every single one, but the ones I've been able to come to I've gotten a lot from. So yeah, I think the space is really valuable, and thank you again for chairing and organizing it. Now I've found the page, I'll start adding some things now.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we hope that was I think the fact that we regularly people keep coming, we took that as an indicator, and I think we also recognize and absolutely understand that it's a monthly space, but we don't expect people to be able to come every month, and that was another reason that we didn't reduce the frequency, because actually it's if you can't come every time and it's only happens every quarter, it becomes quite disjointed. So come when you can, contribute what you can, and share your work with us. I think that's the big ask, and it doesn't have to be a fabulous PowerPoint like we've had today. It can be, just talking about what you're wrestling with, and what you'd like help with, or what you thought went really well, and you thought this one little thing made all the difference. I think those sorts of things are really really important to share, because in some ways they're easier to take and give them a go. Okay. Still don't know what NVC training is.
I quickly Googled it, and what's coming up is nonviolent communication. Which feels relevant.
Yeah.
But anyone who requested it, please send across. I'm happy to find someone that can come and talk about it.
We'll find something, and it might not be what people
hopefully
are
it's what you I'm sure we'll learn something.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start. Please feel free to carry on creating your sticky notes, and as Angela said, she'll send the link to this out with Megan's slides, and what else from today? Anything else from today? You'll get an email. I think there's probably about to be a feedback form put into the chat, and we'll keep the Padlet whiteboard sticky page open for 2 weeks. So please contribute to that and share the invitation and the link with other people in your teams. We will continue, I think, pretty much as we have been going for the last, I think it's 4 or 5 years this group has been meeting. And kind of there are some people who were in at the beginning, still joining us. So I think the fact that we have been managing to keep going for that long is testament to something. And so we'll continue to plan the sessions and try to get the kind of the tone and the focus right. But please do make suggestions in that link, but also feel free to contact Angela and myself at any time if you have an offer or an ask. We'll see what we can do to accommodate it. All right, so I think we're almost at the end. I think you might even get 2 minutes between now and your next meeting if we wind up. So I'll just say thank you again to Megan. I'm really going to look forward to reading and digesting the work that you've done, because I think it's massive, complex, and but really important. And do reach out. I'll link you up with the chairs for the PPN Community of Practice, and we will see you all in April. Do we have something for April, Angela?
Yes, we've got Dr. Rachel Turnbull, who works in the northeast of England, and she's going to be speaking about kind of zooming out from services to talk about healthy, happy places and trauma-informed care. So hopefully that will be a kind of nice change.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for all of your feedback and comments, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Megan and
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks so much,
Bye.
guys.